Welcome to the IT Security One-to-One Summit podcast series. Listen to industry insiders discuss the most critical issues in IT security. Featured on this episode, David Cass, the Global Chief Information Security Officer for Cloud and SaaS Operations, IBM, talks with Malcolm Harkins, Chief Information Security Officer, Cylance Corporation. You are listening to the IT Security One-to-One Summit podcast series.
Hello, my name is David Cass. I am the Global Chief Information Security Officer for IBM Cloud and SaaS Operations. I'm here today with Malcolm Harkins, who is the Chief Information Security Officer of Cylance. Malcolm, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, David.
So I guess today we'll have, as peer CISOs, have a conversation of, what's really going on in today's cybersecurity environment. How are you addressing some of the key challenges that you've seen that are new, I guess, in today's environment versus the past 5 years?
I think the thing that's really kind of driven a lot of change the past several years is obviously there's a big news effect. So I think, boards, executives are certainly seeing a lot more things in the news. So there's a heightened sense of executive scrutiny and question and answer that I think we're all needing to do. Beyond that kind of reactionary thing with the executive office, though, I think the continued speed with which the vulnerabilities are getting found and they're permeating every part of technology, and you're having device explosion, application explosion, and data moving to the cloud, and everybody running faster towards the technology without sometimes understanding what the potential implications of it are. We've got a challenge architecturally, I think, up front in figuring out how to manage that, and then on the back end, just the day-to-day issues with malware and lost and stolen devices and other issues.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I think, fundamentally the way the world works has really changed. When I look at it, it's about, I have to be able to protect my data and my applications no matter where they live. And that's changed that traditional perimeter, walled castle kind of model. And I think that's, a current challenge that we're working through as CISOs. And additionally, one of the things that we've been challenged with, too, is in today's security environment, it's great and it's bad to be in security. And it's great because we're a full employment industry right now. It's also challenging, though, of finding good talent. So from recruiting talent, what are you doing to attract people, and how do you retain them?
I think there's a few different things. I mean, we can either buy talent and pay for the highest bidder, right? Either through buying it through consultancies or go recruit somebody away from somebody else. And I think we're all doing that to augment and get resources on board that have the skills we need. But we also have to continue to grow talent. So for me, that is getting interns, finding somebody fresh out of college, getting somebody who's maybe been in the work environment, understands controls, maybe been a technologist but not a security or privacy professional, and grow them in a different way. And so I think there's multiple ways we can source the talent. Some take longer, but if done right, I think there might have a higher stickiness factor in staying in your organizations because you've helped them grow and you've helped them transform their careers.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I've been looking at, how do we improve our internship programs? Where am I getting other people from outside of the traditional InfoSec industry? I've been looking at, more than just computer science. I've been looking at, mathematics people, things like that, as far as, we can train you. You just have to have the desire to really learn. And I think part of what we have to do as CISOs is we really have to do a better job of, portraying that there is an actual career path in cybersecurity, whereas most other industries, there's a career path that people are well known. I think in cybersecurity, we don't do enough to really promote that there is a true career path here if you want it.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, and I think that is something that you can do and grow. Do I want to be an individual contributor, security analyst, security engineer, maybe security architect? Do I want to be a security manager? Do I want to run security operations? Do I want to do risk reviews, compliance? There's so many different facets to it that you can actually also, once people make those decisions, you can rotate them through the different kind of optics of the risk and the roles from operations to engineering to some of the more senior management decision-making, where in some cases you're choosing between what's the least worst answer for the company.
Yeah, that's great. And I think going back to some of your earlier remarks of, security has, for better or worse, more visibility than ever. as security leaders, we have more accountability than ever. And I think the other key component of it is, as we're getting a seat now more and more at the table with the rest of the business, that security needs to be an enabler of business. And there's some challenges there from a leadership skills point of view. You're usually taking people that have been highly technical, and now they have to really start understanding the business. So, based on your leadership experience, what are some of your suggestions for current CISOs as leaders and the next generation?
Great question. Folks might be familiar with a concept that IDEO had originally created called a T-shaped individual, where you had a breadth of technical acumen and then a depth of business acumen to drive innovation. And I've taken that T-shaped model, and I said for CISOs or CPOs or anybody in this stuff, that's necessary but not sufficient. We need to be what I call Z-shaped. We have to have a breadth of technical acumen that can span small form factor to IoT to data center to network. We have to have a breadth of business acumen where we can understand what business we're in and business processes and to some extent the finance, the marketing, that type of stuff. And then our depth needs to be the risk, security, controls, compliance related stuff to kind of connect the dots on that stuff. So if you think about it from the skill sets, we've got to constantly push ourselves to be Z-shaped and continually grow the technical acumen, the business acumen, and that risk and security acumen as well.
Yeah, no, that's great. I completely agree with you. And the other challenge too is, we have the people, we have the process, and we have the technology. How do you keep security awareness and security at the forefront of the whole organization? Since we know that generally, based on the current attacks that we see, that people are almost always the weakest link currently.
I think that there's the way in which you do it, and you mentioned people are the weakest link. I mean, I've had a long-term view that people are the perimeter. They're the ones designing the technology. They're the ones implementing and managing the technology that creates the inherent vulnerabilities to begin with. And then in many cases, we're the people that are downloading an app, using a device, clicking on a link. And so you have to have a constant set of awareness around that relative to the role and the job context, so that you can, if you're a finance guy and you're in a company and you're in the treasury department, you might be a highly targeted individual considering the cash you're managing, and contextualizing your role and the risk that you might create for the company, I think is the best way to keep that awareness up.
No, that's great. And I think part of what either unintentionally, sometimes we make security more complicated than it should be for the entire organization. We were discussing earlier that concept of, give them principles rather than detailed standards and procedures. I'd love for you to elaborate on that.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in principle-based decision-making. You can train people on rules, and rules are incredibly detailed, and guess what? We're going to forget all the rules. But if you think of the principles that you're doing, the values, it's easier to get people to understand them, it's quicker to train on them, and they're always going to be directionally correct. And then, it's a matter of that degree. Once you get that principle aligned, the other thing we find in corporations is sometimes the friction between the security team and maybe the marketing organization, or something that somebody wants and we think that there's a risk issue. And if you're at that juggernaut where you can't agree, you can go up to the principal and say, what does the principal tell us we should do? It's a quicker way to resolve the issues.
No, that's great. And I think, we had also started talking about earlier of the, where we talk about a lot of times organizations are so focused on detect and respond, where all they're doing is really shortening the horizon of when it's detected. You place great emphasis on moving down the chain to the prevention area. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I think again we all know that we've got a few major control dials to turn. We can prevent risk, we can detect and respond to it across any type of risk item. But we need to categorize what their purpose is. Detection and response is our damage minimization controls, because things are already occurring. So the only thing you can do is shrink the time to detect and time to contain in hopes of minimizing damage. And if you put it in that context, then you go, well, prevention's the only true form of vulnerability minimization and true reduction in the potential for harm. And so I'm a former finance guy. If you think of it like a portfolio of controls, how am I spending my resources and money? And what's my allocation? And if all of my allocation is in detection and response, then the question becomes, is that because that's where the industry is and that's all what's selling to me for me to implement? Or are there things that I can do that will, again, better prevent these things to begin with, so that I can stop getting all the alerts and reduce the alert fatigue that all of our teams are seeing.
Yeah, that's great. And we definitely talked about alert fatigue just being, there's so many logs, so many alerts coming in. It's, and there's been so many other instances in the news where companies have, they've had the alert, but maybe they just got buried in the volume of information that it didn't come up as really actionable intelligence. So I like your idea of, making sure that we're pushing on prevention as well as really developing that space. So if you had to give 2 or 3, I guess, key takeaways for other security leaders or people looking to come into information security, what would they be?
A couple things. I think, one, be clear on your purpose. I mean, why are you doing this? What's the business that your company's in? And aligning the security mission with the mission of the organization. So again, getting clear on the purpose and aligned with the business is number 1. 2, grow yourself and grow your team into that Z-shaped individual so that, again, you're growing all the acumen. And then finally, again, I've shown my 9 box of controls. Understand the prevention, detection, and response, and understand how much is automated, semi-automated, and manual. And continue to try and drive down into something that is more preventative and automated with a low degree of control friction so you're not frustrating the business and frustrating your users.
Yeah, that's great, and thank you so much for your time. I know we could spend pretty much all day probably talking about this topic since it's so near and dear to our hearts. But Malcolm, thank you so much. I really appreciated your valuable insights.
Thanks, David.
Thanks for listening to the IT Security One-to-One Summit podcast series. To listen to other podcasts or for more information on the IT Security One-to-One Summit, visit us at one2onesummits.com/ITSec. That's ONE2ONE summits.com/ITSEC.